Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode 3 of Bizarro Style. I am Galahad, joined here by my magnificent co-host, Bizarro.
Goodbye, everybody.
There he is, as usual, in all his splendor and glory. Today we are going to be talking about the great Wraith debate. There, almost like a tongue twister. But yeah, it's specifically about Wraith Arena, about what the issue is facing Wraith Arena right now. We'll have a couple of arguments from Bizarro here, trying to help us understand how it can be improved and trying to give the developers some feedback on what tactics they can employ to make it better or maybe rework it from the ground up. So let's start with today's first point as to what is the issue with Wraith Arena. Go ahead, Bizarro.
So in the last few months, the Wraith system, or more commonly the PvP system, is getting a lot of attention. And the reason for that attention is that players are debating whether the way that Wraith scores points for victories is fair for all players. So what we wanted to do with this video is to lay out the argument for reform of Wraith, as well as lay out the counter arguments to reforming Wraith. So in other words, we're not trying to tell players what they should think or what their view should be on this issue. We just want to lay out the debate so that people can form their own opinions as this moves forward.
Right, and I agree with that. I concur. The main thing with Wraith Arena right now is that it's extremely punishing to players who have invested a lot in their toons and characters, and we are here basically today to help rectify that and help pose some suggestions to the developers how they can proceed with basically making it better for all the players. So what do you think, Bizarro? Any suggestions off the top of your head?
Well, I think, again, I don't know if we necessarily want to be prescriptive in the video, although we will debate the topic at the end. I think what we were really hoping for was to really lay out what's the argument for reform and what are any potential arguments against reform and what are even the counter arguments to that.
Right, and I am feeling a bit under the weather, guys, so I apologize for that. If there's something wrong with my recording, and you have to excuse me for that. But yeah, so let's actually start. So main thing is, how does Wraith scoring work? Would you like to explain that, Bizarro?
Sure. So each Wraith victory has a possible number of points the player can receive. The most common are 3 to 6, 6 to 9, 8 to 14, and 13 to 20. If you're Gear 9, there actually is a different point range that you can receive for a victory. But I'm going to focus on those because those are the most common. And the number of points you receive is based on whether you defeat the computer with 1, 2, or 3 stars. And so let me use 2 examples. So if a player were to earn a 3-star victory for a 3 to 6 point match, the player receives 3 points for the first star, 2 points for the second star, and 1 point for the third star, for a total of 6 points. And obviously, if you were to lose any characters during the battle, you're going to get fewer stars, which means fewer points. To use a second example, if a player were to earn a 3-star victory from a 3 to 20 match, the player receives 13 points for the first star, 5 points for the second star, and 2 points for the third star, for a total of 20 points.
Right, and that would be the current thing that's going on in game. Now, regarding the number of points, would you like to touch on a little bit of the old point system?
Sure. So for newer players, you may not know that this was not always the way the point system was. You can ask maybe an older player sometime. We didn't want to get into it in this video, but there was a big issue surrounding Deathstroke and Baby Lobo, and that led to a reform of the point scoring system. Our recollection is that it used to be just a flat number of points that you received for a victory, but there was a rework to this 3-star system. So this is just to give a little history to basically say this was not always the way it was done.
Correct. And if I recall correctly, I was a huge advocate of that point system as compared to this point system, because as we were discussing before recording this episode, is that it renders the tunes that use revive a bit useless now. And the thing what Bizarro meant to say for newer players who don't know what Baby Lobo is was basically having Deathstroke at max level at that time in max gear, and the Lobo being leveled, I believe, to level 60, or basically halfway, I should say. And what Lobo would do is that Lobo kept reviving. You guys know what Lobo does. And then Deathstroke kept getting those buffs and it would take out an entire enemy team. So that's what Bizarro means by using Baby Lobo. So anyway, moving on to the next thing that we want to touch on today is how does a computer determine the number of points you can potentially receive for a given match?
Right. So in order to understand how the computer determines how many points you get for a given match, the first thing you have to understand is your highest team score and why your highest team score matters. So the number of points a player can receive for a given match is determined by taking the difference between the total team score for your 4 highest characters versus the total team score of your opponent on your PvP board. And the further the distance between your team and the opponent team, the greater the points that will be available, with a cap of a maximum of 13 to 20 points for a given match. So I wanted to use an example of that, of this, and it's here I kind of want to give a shout out to my best friend of 30 years, Bizarro Lantern, for allowing me to use his screenshots from his account, because what we wanted to show was the difference between 2 players where my characters are much more upgraded than his. His are a little bit lower. So if we look at Bizarro Lantern's total team score, what we can see is that his 4 highest characters add up to 26,230. Whereas if we look at my total team score, then we see that the total team score for my highest 4 characters is 33,164. So just under a 7,000 point difference between our 2 teams, which means if he was to encounter me in the Wraith Arena, he's likely to receive 13 to 20 points if he can score a victory over me.
Right, and so, this is... sorry, go ahead, Bizarro.
No, please go.
So, and this is exactly the point that Bizarro is trying to make here, that this is why your team score matters. And if right now, as PvP stands in the game in Wraith Arena, is if you are looking to get those teams that are like give you 20 points in the arena, 14 to 20 points, you basically don't want to upgrade your characters. And in other games, it's funny because in this game you actually get punished for upgrading your characters, and it shouldn't be that way. So that's what Bizarro is trying to hit on, basically.
Right. And I think, so I would say the next thing we need to understand is how is your team score calculated? Because, we're looking at the comparison between our 2, but how did the computer come up with that? And obviously at the most basic level, your highest team score is just the total score of your 4 most powerful characters in your lineup. So if you look at the graphic that we're going to be showing, you can see that for Bizarro Lantern, this is Hal Jordan, Green Lantern, Etrigan, Wonder Girl, and Alan Scott. And for me, it's Black Adam, Reverse Flash, Batman, and Green Arrow. But this raises another question, which is, so how is each character score calculated? And this has often been a question of discussion in many videos on DC Legends itself, because nobody actually knows how those scores are calculated. So if you're looking at that graphic, Nobody really knows how the computer arrives at 6573 for Bizarro Lantern's Hal Jordan. But what we do know is that that score will rise in relation to three main factors, which is the character's level in the game, the gear set that or I shouldn't say gear set, how much the gear has been upgraded for that character, and whether the character has been rebirthed or not, and how many times they've been rebirthed. So why does this matter? It matters because we could have two characters at the same level, let's say level 70, for example, and they will not necessarily be the same power or that score that they received underneath their name, which then ultimately determines your team score. So, for example, I have my Hal Jordan at level 70 with all level 11 gear, and he is rebirthed, and you can see him just below the snapshot of my highest team score, and you can see that he's rated at an 8,000 level. Now, similarly, Bizarro Lantern also has his at level 70, but has also rebirthed his Green Lantern, but he has not completed all of the level 11 gear for Hal Jordan. So you can see that if we compare our two Hal Jordans, his is rated at 6573, whereas mine is rated at 8,000. And we'll return to this point later in the video because this is going to be a really important point to understand the debate behind the Wraith Arena.
Right, and this is what a lot of people talk about when they say Gear 10.5. This is basically what Gear 10.5 is, that you basically either have half of your gear at Gear 11 and the other half not even geared, or you have them at level 70 and a couple of gear items there. And yeah, this is basically what I would say is hurting PvP a little bit. And not to blame Bizarro Lantern, but if he wants to get more points, he has to do this, and you shouldn't have to do this in a game.
And let me be clear too, because when Bizarro Lantern and I talk about this, he's just slowly upgrading his characters. He's not doing this as a way to gain more points. It just so happens he gets more points for this because of the way he's upgrading his roster. And we'll talk more about Gear 10.5 in a couple of minutes because it is an important point as you're pointing out, Galahad.
Absolutely, that's what I meant. I didn't mean to say that Bizarro Lantern's doing it on purpose. No, this is just how the game is right now. It's not his fault.
Right.
But yeah. So what does the number of points? Why does the number of points per match matter, Bizarro?
Okay. Before I hit that point, because that's a good question, I want to talk about how your team score relates to as you advance in the Wraith Arena. When you start in a weekly PvP tournament in Wraith, you're going to be paired around teams of similar power to yours, or those that are a little bit lower than yours. But as you advance through the tournament, and by advance I mean you're rising up in what place you are in the tournament, and as you get up to around 5,000th or 1,500th place, you're going to start to receive teams that are more powerful than your own team more often. And in fact, the further you go, the more powerful those teams should get. In other words, the distance between your highest team score and the team you're facing will get even greater. So this means that as you progress, you should generally expect to receive more points per match as the distance between your highest power team and the opponent's team power grows. So in fact, we have an example of this we'll be showing. And if you look at the example we're putting up there, you can see the current PvP board for myself and for Bizarro Lantern. And when you look at that, you'll see that all of his opponents are worth 13 to 20 points, while my opponents are worth 3 to 6 or 6 to 9 typically. I wish I had a better screenshot of my whole board, but I've been focusing on the gem blitz right now. So it's in no way to bias the sample to show that, oh, I only have 3 to 6. That is very typical for me, that I only have 3 to 6 point matches.
Right, and for me personally, because not all of my tunes are gear 70, gear 11. Actually, most of them are gear 60, level 60, gear 10. And I would say 12 or 13 of them are level 70, gear 11. I'm getting mostly 9-point matches. And this just shows the unfair system right now, is that if you want to score more points, and I'm sorry I keep emphasizing on this factor, because this is the main thing that is hurting the Wraith Arena. And it needs to be fixed. That's all I can say. But yeah, it would be better if you were not basically punished and not penalized for making your characters more stronger in a game which states you to collect all the characters and make them stronger. Am I right, Bizarro?
Yeah, I think that's the argument that we're hearing, and I think we'll also address the counter arguments to that, because we obviously have our own opinions about this. But I want the viewer to be able to form their own opinion. Although I think they'll arrive at the same place that you are. I want to see if we can present it in a way that they can make a decision for themselves based on the information that we're presenting. Although, again, I think they'll arrive in the same place we are.
Absolutely. So anything else you want to add, Bizarro?
Well, I wanted to return back to that question that you asked about why does the number of points per match matter, because this is where we're starting to get into the heart of the argument that's being put forth against the current Wraith scoring system. So again, that question is, why does the number of points per battle matter?
Correct.
So obviously, a player would rather receive more points per victory than less points per victory, so they can have a higher total in the tournament. But I want to take it even a little further than that, because let's imagine 2 players battling it out for first place, where one is receiving 13 to 20 points per battle, and the other's getting about 3 to 6 points per battle. It's very obvious that the one player is gaining an advantage in the number of points they can receive per battle for a victory, but they're receiving a second advantage. And that second advantage is time. And this is a point that we are going to come back to, because the idea of time is going to be really important in Wraith Arena.
Right, because in most games, most other games, I would say time is also the main currency. Like, the more you play, the higher points you get, and the higher you get up there in the leaderboard in most games. And,
exactly.
Time is a very valuable resource. So, a recap of the argument, Bizarro, for today.
Okay, so let's return to the idea again. So we'll call this part 2 of why does team score matter.
Right.
So if you recall, my highest team score of my 4 highest tunes was 33,164, and Bizarre Lantern's highest team score was 26,230. So the question that we have to ask is, what is the probability that I will encounter a higher scoring team versus the probability that Bizarre Lantern will encounter a higher scoring team? And the answer is, it's very low. The probability that I will encounter a higher scoring team is very low, whereas for him it's very high. Because I have upgraded my roster, the more I upgrade, the higher my top 4 tunes will be, making my highest team score higher, which means that I will encounter fewer players that have a higher roster than mine. In other words, the distance between my roster and others will, on average, be lower than the distance between Bizarre Lantern's roster and the opponents that he encounters. So that means I have a very low probability of receiving any matches worth 8 to 14 or 13 to 20 points. And in fact, I was thinking about this point because I only know of one player in the game anymore that I get 13 to 20 points out of. I won't say who it is, And I get here or there, I might get one or two 8 to 14 matches, but they're very rare. And in fact, to illustrate this point, we can look at our PvP boards again and see that the difference in our PvP boards and the points that we can get per match is very stark. He has Bizarro Lantern has, I don't know why I can't say Bizarro Lantern today, but he has more points available per match, giving him an advantage of points and time over me. So if you think about it, at 3 to 6 points, I'd have to win 2 to 3 matches to equal one match for him. So if he's getting, let's say he gets 20 points in a victory, I, at a 6-point win, would have to equal 3 of those. So he's not only gaining an advantage of points over me, but he's also gaining an advantage of time because he can produce more points in a given amount of time than I can.
Right. And just to go over and recap everything that we talked about right now, what's the argument being put forth against Wraith today?
So the argument that's being put forth, to summarize everything that we've said, is that the scoring system, which is based on the highest team score of a player, creates a disincentive to upgrade characters as it punishes the player for upgrading because they receive fewer points per PvP match than less upgraded rosters. So by receiving less points per PvP match, this creates an advantage for lower score rosters by giving them more points per match and the ability to generate more points in a given amount of time than the player whose roster is more powerful. So if upgrading characters is the point of the game, then this system runs counter to that goal as one is punished for upgrading their characters. It also decreases the incentive to spend money on the game because the more I want to upgrade my characters, the more I'm going to spend money to do that. Then it creates a disincentive for that. And we don't want to debate the merits of whether a for-profit game is good or bad, but it is what it is. It's a for-profit game, and to upgrade your characters, you often do need to spend.
Right.
So that's the basic argument.
Right. And on the other hand, there could be a counter argument for this, and people could be like, "Hey, but won't he lose more matches because his team score is lower?" What do you think about that, Bizarro?
That's a good question, and that is a good counterpoint that's often raised to this argument, because one would expect that if his team is not rated very highly, then he would lose more battles. But that's not necessarily the case. Because if you remember earlier when we were talking about how a character's power score is calculated, we said that it was based on 3 things: the character's level, whether they've been rebirthed or not, and how many times they've been rebirthed, and also their gear. And it's gear that I really want to focus on, because although this video is not a video about gear, and so I don't want to get into a long explanation to that, but suffice to say, a savvy player can use gear and knowledge of gear sets to their advantage. And this is what you were referring to earlier, Galahad, as the 10.5 gear, or when somebody upgrades some of their gear to gear 11, but not all of it. So let me take you back to when we were talking about our Hal Jordans and the difference between Bizarro Lantern's Hal Jordan and my own. And there was roughly a 1,500 point difference between those two characters. Although there is a numerical difference between the power of those two characters, the question is, how big is the performance difference between those two characters? And in reality, it's not as big as you might think. And that's because a player who has good knowledge of gear and gear sets using the 10.5 gear can make their character almost as effective as a fully geared character, allowing them to be equally successful in Wraith Arena.
Right. And on the other hand, people could be like, they could pose this question that, but won't he get fewer stars on average than you? So what do you think about that?
Yeah, and that's another. You're raising good questions, because the argument would be, well, if his team is not as powerful, he won't get as many stars as me. So, I can be winning matches with 3 stars. He might be only winning them with 1. And that is perhaps true. He may not be as successful because there is a power difference, although that power difference isn't as great as we might think between our characters. But let's say he wins a battle worth 13 to 20 with only 1 star, meaning that he gets 13 points from it. Whereas if I get 3 stars on a 6-point battle, I still only get 6 points, meaning that I'm getting half of the points for his 1-star win with my 3-star win.
Right, and this is a perfect thing that you mentioned, Bizarro, because people can be like, but won't he lose more battles on defense than you? As the defense log, you know how it is, how it stands right now in game.
Exactly. So we all know you can look at your battle log, and if you go in your battle log, you can see on defense how much have you won and how much have you lost. And if you look at the graphics that we're going to put up on the screen, again, I compared the battle logs between myself and between Bizarro Lantern, and actually I took several screenshots of this. And what you'll see is that there's not much difference in our battle logs. That I believe I had 1 victory in my battle log, whereas he did not have any. So yes, I'm getting 2 points out of that, but it's very hard, as everybody knows, to play defense on DC Legends, because you do not get to select the team that you have on defense. The way that's often been described is that for every team you play on offense, that team gets thrown into a lottery for which the computer then draws a random team that you've used to use on defense. So you can increase the chance of a certain team being used, because the more you use that team, the more it's being thrown in the lottery to be drawn out. But it doesn't mean that you'll necessarily get to use that team for sure on defense. So the point is to say that unless you're really good at defense, I don't believe the difference will be that great between those with lower scoring teams and those with higher scoring teams.
Right, and that's a very valid point that you make. Now, any other closing counter arguments that you'd like to put forward?
So when we were putting this together, we tried to think about other counter arguments that we've heard while this debate has been going on. One that occurred to me was that the idea that being savvy about a character's power, gear, and gear sets is something that shouldn't be punished. In other words, that if I have knowledge about gear and gear sets and I use that to my advantage, I shouldn't be punished for doing that. And maybe that's a valid point. And in fact, maybe I would ask you, what do you think about that, Gal?
So what I think about that is absolutely, I would say I agree with you 110%, because like if you have gear knowledge and about gear sets, say for example if this toon is a striker or if this toon is a tank or however, you should be able to put forth a team that gets you the maximum value out of your points and whatnot. And it should allow you to upgrade your roster without being scared, basically. That's what I think.
And when you say scared, you mean scared of what?
Scared of not getting many more points as compared to you having a roster that is weak and you can score more points in Wraith Arena, because everybody knows that Wraith Arena is only a single part of the game, and there are raids, there are red alerts that we talked about before, and Wraith Arena is kind of, I would say, making the game, how should I put this in a way that doesn't offend anybody? It's kind of like crippling the game, you know what I mean? As in the sense that it's not allowing you to get the full value out of the characters by upgrading them up to their maximum potential.
Right. So, and then, if you weren't going to say anything else about that, I was this one.
No, it's all you. It's all you this episode.
Okay, thanks. So the next counter argument I've heard is, well, it's not my fault you upgraded your roster. So this is like a different version of the strategic argument, that I strategically upgraded my roster and it's not my fault that you didn't. And this is an argument I've heard. I will say, my own thought about this argument is, and perhaps it's indicative of what my knowledge of gear and gear sets was at the time, but I plowed forward with level 70 gear 11 and only later realized the advantage of gear 10.5 in the Wraith system. So, obviously I can't go back in time. I can't redo my characters. So it's not like I did this intentionally. Rather, it was just my own ignorance that I did this. But this is an argument that I hear. It's not my fault you upgraded your roster.
Yeah, not unless you were a speedster. You can't go back in time. But
I'm too fat to be that fast.
Yeah, what I know, right? Yeah, if going slightly off topic here, one of your favorite moves, I remember you telling me in DC Legends, is that of Reverse Flash, how he can go back in time.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, coming back to topic now.
So I guess I should go back and do level 10.5 gear if I can't get enough speed going.
Maybe, right? Borrow Flash's time paradox. Anyway, what closing arguments about whales?
So one last argument that I hear, and you and I were talking about this, is that it's often said that that the idea of reforming Wraith is just a way for whales to whine because they can't win PvP. And I don't consider myself a whale. I don't know if I'm a dolphin or a starfish, or I don't know what I am. I spend a little on the game. I wouldn't consider myself a whale, but I will reveal that I am not happy with this point system. And I don't feel like I'm just whining because I feel like I'm entitled to win everything. But it does create that disincentive that you've mentioned.
Yeah, and it is a big one. So with that being said, Bizarro, if you don't have anything else to add, or if you do, now is the time.
No, I would just say we would love to hear your comments on this issue. Drop us a comment so we can see what you think about this.
Absolutely. Drop us a comment in the comment section below, and you know what to do. Share this video if you thought it was helpful, and of course subscribe to the channel. We would love to hear from you, and as always, we will see you next time.